Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Resilient Health Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Darin Ingels, and I'm really excited about today's episode. I have really one of the foremost leading researchers in the world on electromagnetic radiation. Dr. Olle Johansson, if I'm saying that correctly, is a retired professor at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. And really, I mean, you are very highly published. I know you've written over 500 articles, reviews, book chapters, studies. You and I had a chance to meet, I think we just decided it was about 6 years ago at an EMF conference in Santa Cruz, California. And again, it was really just absolutely eye-opening on the health effects of electromagnetic radiation. Dr. Johansson, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Well, it's a great honor, and I remember the Santa Cruz conference. It was amazingly good, and I think it was an eye opener not only for politicians and civil servants and the general public, but also for us, doctors and scientists, because there were so many new facts being presented. So I do hope that people in Santa Cruz and around will organize a new meeting soon, because it is needed to discern and spread all the information.
When people use this term EMF or electromagnetic frequency, can we break it down a little bit? There's different types of wavelengths out there. Can you kind of help people understand when we talk about electromagnetic frequencies? I mean, there's radio frequencies, there's ionizing, non-ionizing. Can you help kind of just simplify what that really means?
Well, I mean, all the electromagnetic frequencies, if you look on them, they start with so called static fields, and then you move into alternating fields where you get a real frequency. And for instance, 50 or 60 hertz is the power frequency in which you have in your electricity outlets. And then you move into very high frequencies, radio frequencies, which contain between 300 megahertz and 300 gigahertz microwaves. And microwaves are used for telecommunication, like your cell phone, your wireless indoor phone, your Wi-Fi connected laptop, etc. And then from there, you move into higher and higher and higher frequencies, entering eventually into infrared. You have visible light, ultraviolet light. And from ultraviolet light and upwards, you enter the ionizing radiation, the classical ionizing. But it should be said that nowadays there are quite good data pointing to that lower frequencies could very well be ionizing as well. But nevertheless, you come into, for instance, ultraviolet light, UVA, B, and C, then X rays, and then you have the radioactivity with the alpha, beta, and gamma waves. And beyond that, cosmic radiation, which is even more higher energy content. And of course, at that level, cells, molecules will be destroyed more or less immediately. So you need to protect yourself if you're out in outer space. And that has been well known, of course, before the first men and women were sent up into the space.
Are there certain types of radiation, living here on planet Earth that we should be more concerned than others?
Oh, that's a very good question. Um, I mean, to answer it kind of quickly, I would say man-made electromagnetic fields, synthetic fields, which we use for all our gadgets and very fun gadgets, of course. They are having a lot of question marks around them, whereas the natural background fields, all the species that wasn't able to take them and use them in any way, they are of course gone. And all of us, we, for instance, utilize visible light to see things, see colors, and also the mixes into white light. and but we are not susceptible then to other frequencies. We cannot see, for instance, the radio frequencies, although the levels of exposures can only be understood in words like colossal, astronomical, or even biblical levels. They are colossal, times 100, I would say, you know.
Yeah, we live in a world of technology these days. We're surrounded with it. I think as much as we do to protect our homes, ourselves, our neighbors, the businesses around us, we're just being it feels like we're being bombarded with this onslaught of, like I said, man-made synthetic frequencies. Um, you're a professor, you're a researcher. Can you talk a little bit about what the research is showing? Again, I know this seems to be a controversial area, and I'm not really sure why, because it seems like the data is pretty clear. But can you talk about what you've shown in the research about the health impact of what these synthetic electromagnetic fields can do to the human body?
Well, I would first say that the controversy here seems to be more of a political, economical nature. Personally, I never encounter any criticism regarding our publications. Maybe people talk badly about them behind my back, but that I don't know anything about. But politically and economically, of course, results. And I remember when I received a very prestigious prize from Nokia Consumer Electronics in Finland. And when the prize was handed over here in Stockholm, the head of Nokia, he said that Olle Johansson's research could jeopardize the entire Nokia business. But we are also parents. We need to know, he said. And that was very impressive, you know. And of course, he also explained then that to use the outcome of scientific studies could also mean that a company could produce tomorrow's green, human, and environmentally friendly technology. And just imagine, you know, if a company would sell all the cabling, for instance, in the world, all the cell phones, all the computers, and so on once again. And I hope Sweden will do that, because then Sweden will be richer than Japan ever was, because the number of gadgets nowadays, as you say, they are everywhere, in schools, in places of leisure, in homes, workplaces, and you are bombarded, and not only bombarded, but these rays will go right through you. So you are not shielded in any way through your skin and so on. There is a lot to think about it. And from the scientific point of view, there are so many results. I could just start with the one that actually keeps me awake in the nights. And that study is presented 2017, and it had been presented before by other research groups, and it has been replicated many times. And as you say, it's a very stable scientific ground. And what scientists did then was that they exposed ordinary household bacteria that you and I have on us and in us right now. And they used the second generation, the GSM mobile telephony, and also they had super modern Wi-Fi routers, and regardless of the type of radiation, nothing much happened with the bacteria except one thing: they became antibiotic resistant. And at the
Wow.
same year, yeah, at the same year, 2017, the G20 countries met in Europe, because it had been realized that in the order of 25,000 Europeans died every year prematurely because of antibiotic resistance in healthcare. And it was said that by the year 2050, that number worldwide would be in the order of 10 million people per year. The thing was that the G20 countries didn't know about Tahiri and co-workers who had done the research. And Tahiri and co-workers didn't know about the G20 countries. But if you mix these two, Then maybe by 2050, it will not be 10 million people, but 8.2 billion people that will be at jeopardy. Because if you cannot use antibiotics successfully in healthcare any longer, then you will see that people will start to die as they did at the end of the 1900th century from a splinter in their thumb. And also, not to be forgotten, during the pandemic, I remember I saw an interview with one of the officials from the World Health Organization in Geneva, in Switzerland. And the reporter asked him if COVID 19 was the worst threat to mankind. And he kind of smiled a little bit and said, "No, we will be able to manage it. That will not be a big problem." And the reporter was smart. So he said, "But what is then the biggest threat to mankind?" And the guy from the World Health Organization said, "Well, that's very easy to answer. It's antibiotic resistance in healthcare." And since then, I just saw a few days ago, I think it was actually in the United States, where they had found new types of bacteria, also now resistant to antibiotics. And the same has been demonstrated, I think it was last year, for soil bacteria. So, wow, that keeps me awake, I can tell you. And I hope that people in charge and in power not only wage war and talk from different discussion points and so on, but really do something instead.
Wow, I mean that's that's really scary when you talk about, antibiotic resistance and perhaps disrupting your general microbiome in whatever way. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
the
and
mounds of data on the microbiome and how important it is for modulating metabolism in your immune system
yeah,
and pretty much
and
everything.
yeah, and you see, impacts on the immune system. And to make a long story short, it seems as if the immune system initially reacts as if the electromagnetic fields would be an allergen, but after some time, the immune system deteriorates and starts to leak. And maybe that's also the explanation why you see other quite horrible effects. For instance, damage of the DNA molecules. Again, just a few days ago was yet a new paper pointing to that stem cells in I think it was rats. They were also harmed by electromagnetic signals that was, I think it was 20 times below what people in California should withstand in public exposure. So it is ongoing, and not to be forgotten, effects on sperm cells and fertility. When sperm cells are irradiated with cell phone radiation, they come out having less viable sperm cells. They look differently, they move more badly, and there are fewer when you count them. And as you know, then you can go to real life events, and people like in Europe, United States, and so on, complain nowadays that it's very difficult to make babies. So there is a lot of artificial insemination programs, and it's exploding really as an industry. And but in the background, you have the fact that both sperm cells as well as egg cells, they should not buy and not use cell phones, for instance. Furthermore, and you see, we are kind of circling around humans. We talked about bacteria, we talk about the immune system effects, we have the fertility issues. And another thing that is very scary too are impacts on insects, especially pollinators. And I know that the United States, you have lost more than 90% of bumblebees, honeybees, the same figures from Canada. Europe has done actually very well. If I could be a bit cynical, we have only lost in the order of 75%. But it's, of course, not good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are constant documentaries being aired here in Sweden from the United States, from England, from France, and so on, pointing to that something is very, very bad with the pollinators. And maybe you have seen this extremely famous double photograph from United States. They made it first in a big food store, and you see all the shelves filled with fruits, vegetables, nuts, and so on. And then they remove all the things that are dependent on pollinators, and wow, the store basically is empty because there is so many things that are in packages, in tin cans, and so on that
Right.
also are dependent on pollinators. So it's a shocking image to see. And I mean, again, I don't know what people in charge and in power really are doing about it, and I'm not naive. Of course, there are other culprits like insecticides, pesticides, viruses, changes in the farming landscape, and so on. But some crops actually you can farm without insects, and one of them are all the cereals like barley, rye, wheat, and so on. And in Sweden, all the farmers they have basically left all the other types of crops that they used to farm, and only are now farming these cereals. And it's funny because a few days ago there was a big article pointing to that when the farmers are doing one and only one thing, the volume increases, of course, of the production of wheat, etc., meaning that the prices drop, meaning that they will put a lot of farmers out of business. And I have warned about exactly this, but few have listened. And the same is going on with other things. I am constantly trying to warn. And when I say warn, I include also the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and so forth. And so far, few reply. And if they reply, it's basically an answer saying that we don't give a toss about this. And that's surprising to me because I thought more about my fellow men and women, especially parents. And when I go here in Stockholm in the underground, I'm always surprised that people are not standing up screaming in horror, because that is, I would say, a relevant response right now. And I hope people will find funding for research projects because it is needed. And I say again, I'm not naive. There are a lot of culprits here, but they need to be investigated.
Well, as a practicing doctor, I worry. Well, of course, I worry about the totality of our total load, which includes all of the EMS we get exposed to. But I especially worry about our kids. I see kids now; their phone is always attached to them; it's on them. I see young women putting it in their bras, close to the body, close to sensitive tissue. Boys sticking it in their front pocket, close to their testicles. And again, you're talking about affecting sperm count, affecting potentially causing some sort of cancerous change. Is there any data to suggest that children are more susceptible to the impact of the EMFs than adults?
Maybe not more, but of course the impact will be very different because they have just started their life. Whereas, for instance, myself, I'm old. So if I would get like a tumor or something, it wouldn't really be that dramatic from a population point of view. But if, for instance, the sperm cells cease to work, well, may have read about the study from Greece, Magras and Xenos, who investigated mice. And they demonstrated that over time, the fifth generation practically became infertile, meaning that our grandchildren will not be able to get children any longer. And that would be like in 150 years' time. And then it's too late to call back and say, hey, people in 2025 or even before that, could you please stop doing what you're doing? Because otherwise, mankind will face obliteration. So there are very important long term effects. And their study was very well controlled. And I remember the editor of the journal, he told me that when he got the referee reports, and colleagues, they will read the manuscript and either say yes, or maybe they need to do some more research, or no, to the manuscript. But all the scientists said, no, it's fantastic. The Greek scientists have done a very, very detailed and accurate job. But the editor, he felt that, I need to send it to five more referees. And since I worked my whole life at the Karolinska Institute and the Royal Institute of Technology, I have been in contact with the Nobel Prizes in physiology or medicine and in chemistry and physics. And such double referee control actually has been made very often when you open the registers of old Nobel Prizes. You see that they went through double referee reports because the editors at the time, they didn't trust the outcome, and they didn't think it could be as the future Nobel laureates actually said. But of course, they were right, and later on, they did receive their Nobel Prizes. So, and I'm not saying that Magras and Senos will, but it's a sign, I would say, that their research is extremely important. And since then, as I say, a lot of other studies have been added, pointing to that. Well, something is going on, and I'm very happy you brought up the total load, because we talk now about physical exposures, the huge chemical exposure situation, stressors like what you see in children in the schoolwork, and when they download information and so on. There is a lot of mental pressure on them, etc. So there are a lot of things coming together, and well, I hope people know what they're doing.
It was really interesting. I remember at the conference, I can't remember who presented, but this was back when we were still using 2G technology, however long ago that was. And I don't think people understand when you hear, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. There was a shift between 4G and 5G, correct? That it's a completely different technology. It's not just the next kind of iteration of cell phone network. It's a different technology altogether.
Yeah,
But going back to when it was 2G, I remember the study was they had put a 2G tower in a firehouse, and shortly thereafter, the firefighters, they would get confused going on calls. They wouldn't remember street addresses. These are people who grew up in these neighborhoods that couldn't remember where to go. And somehow they finally figured out that, oh, hey, this all started happening, after this tower was installed. They eventually had it removed, and then people kind of got their memory back. And again, that was 2G, so
yeah.
how long ago
And
that was.
I remember that was Susan Foster, a fantastic woman, and she described these events. And you could argue that such a observation in real life is not controlled, it's not standardized, and so
Yeah.
on. But it should be added, there is a number of studies using animals, showing the very same that the firefighters reported. For instance, Henry Lai and his co-workers at the University of Washington in Seattle have shown that when you expose rats, and they should find food in a maze, you expose them for 45 minutes, not 45 years, 45 minutes. And at the exposure level, which is well below what you and I should withstand in our public life. And then these rats, which are super smart, very quick to find the food in a maze, they started to make mistakes. And it was interpreted as they had an decreased short term memory and a decreased concentration capacity. And I say, is that what we would like to have in firefighters, in airline pilots, or in brain surgeons? No way. And not in pupils and students either. And unfortunately, it looks like if you read all the literature, and that would take months to go through, but it definitely looks like the irradiation, 2G and so on, is actually dumbing people down. And
Yeah.
to me, that's surprising because I always try to be a better little Olle, and do my homework and learn more and more and not allow anyone to dumb me down. But that is actually going on right now. And also, you mentioned 5G, very interesting. As you say, it's a big leap from 4G to 5G from a technical point of view. And I don't know if the people looking here can see this distance between my two fingers here. It's about an inch or a bit less. That's the wavelength of 5G, and that's the size of a honeybee or a bumblebee. So these insects are body resonant to these fields or signals, picking up the energy excellently well. And the question is that good or not good for these animals? And with this enormous deterioration in the number, it doesn't seem to be very good. But of course, I hope Americans, Europeans, and others like bread because that will be still produced. But fruits, vegetables, nuts rapidly will decline.
Yeah. There's been a lot of talk about the potential for, particularly, I'm picking on cell phones and causing cancer, particularly brain tumors. Is there any data to show that that's true?
Well, if you ask me if I should make like a list, so then of course cancer drops down quite a lot because when you look on statistically significant incidence increases in that kind of brain tumors, you don't find them. There are none, and even in heavily exposed countries like Sweden, it's a slight decrease in the incidence. And no one would say that it's good with the radiation, it kills off cancers or something. No, no, no. Probably there isn't any interaction, but we need to follow it over time. But since the first NMT 450 systems, that was the beginning of the 1980. So it's quite a long exposure time. And I say again, Sweden with Ericsson telecommunication, we have been exposed 24/7 and since then for all the technologies because they were tested on, for instance, Stockholm population first. So if there would have been a dramatic cancer incidence increase, we would have seen it. But it could come later, of course. So we need to keep an eye on it.
Um, I also want to talk a little bit about, how do we as humans protect ourselves? Again, we're surrounded by it. What are the things that people can do today uh, to the best of their ability to protect themselves from some of these harmful man-made, electromagnetic fields?
Well, to begin with, they should listen to podcasts like yours to get information. And then they should also contact their politicians at government and parliament, health authorities, radiation protection authorities, asking them simple question. Is this safe for me and my children? Yes or no? Uh, but then, of course, they could also try to use distance, meaning move away from source of radiation, as well as shielding, and that is not easy. And I remember, for instance, 1998, that's a long time ago, there was a conference in Göteborg on the west coast of Sweden. It was called Mobile Phones and Health. And I believe it was like a week long, actually. And at the end of that week, I asked the organizer and the chairman of the conference, he was a physicist, and I said, now we have listened to all these excellent scientists. They have described effects at the molecular, the cellular, the tissue and organ level, the individual level, group level. If I want to protect myself, how far away should I put my cell phone on the table?
Yeah.
Half a meter or 1 meter, or how far away? And then he said and remember, this is 1998. Since
Yeah.
then, thousands of papers have been published. But at that time, he said, well, it's hard to give an exact number here, but if you put it 5 to 10 kilometers away, that would do it. People don't realize, how strong these transmitters are compared to natural background, and how little you need to have these biological and biophysical effects, either at the human level or at animal, plant, fungi, bacteria level, maybe even at the virus level. There are questions around, for instance, COVID-19 and
Yeah.
the association with the build out for 5G. It could have been some kind of unfortunate accident happening then, with all the energy being fed into viral populations. It's just a speculation yet, but there are papers by some American scientists pointing to this possibility.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a meter that I have at home where I can measure different types of electromagnetic fields. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that like a safe field is less than 10 watts per meter squared. I think that was the threshold. And I put it next to my iPhone, and it went up to over 500,000
Yeah.
watts per meter squared.
And then remember the natural background fields, which we were born into, they would be, and I don't have the exact number here, but they would be something in the order of 0.000000000 and so on, one.
Yeah.
So they are very, very low. And for instance, when I give lectures, I ask the audience to think that we would be able to turn off everything. And I mean everything: radio, television, power lines, and all types of telecommunication, and only keep the third generation, 3G. And then I ask them, if you only keep that, the allowed exposure levels compared to natural background, are they twice as high? Are they 3 times as high? And then the audience, they would go, oh, we need to think about that. And once I remember was an old man who said, no, 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 it's much more. It's 100 times higher. And the audience went, no, no one would be allowed to expose the population at such high levels. But the answer is actually a quintillion times. That's a 1 with 18 zeros. And I'm not kidding.
Wow.
It's just a biblical, astronomical, colossal exposure. But since it's invisible, no one thinks about it. But when you measure it, it's appallingly high exposure levels. And just imagine, for instance, tomorrow in California, the outdoor temperature has been risen a quintillion times. Then not only California will burn in a wildfire, but actually the entire planet will just disappear like this.
Yeah.
So the exposures that are allowed from a technical point of view, I do hope again that people in charge and power know what they're doing.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that it's a we love our technology, we love the advances, we love the access to information. There's been a lot of positives, but again, I think technology advanced so quickly over the last certainly 40, 50 years that I don't know that we've really slowed down to again look at the health impact of what these devices are doing to us, particularly the ones that we carry in on us. Like you said, distance is your friend, and the fact that we keep these things so close to us all the time. Um, you know,
And also people, of course, are not educated and informed like you are. And for instance, I remember I gave a lecture and we were talking about the bacteria, and then there was a woman who said, who cares about bacteria? They're just evil. Well, if you allow me to count all the cells in your body, all the blood cells, all the brain cells, the muscle cells, the bone cells, then the most common cell type is actually bacteria. And
Yeah.
she was shocked, you know.
Yeah, I don't think people realize we are 90% bug.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
only about
Yeah,
10% us.
yeah, you are so right, you know. And she was really shocked. And the audience also, they looked in horror at me, you know. They had not thought about it. But that's the reality.
Yeah.
And therefore, when American scientists do experiments with bacteria, we should listen. Definitely, you know.
Well, Professor, I really appreciate all of this really helpful information you shared with us today. In fact, I'd love to have you back on again. I know we just kind of hit the tip of the iceberg, and we could talk for another 6 hours about various aspects of this. But
Well, I would say actually 6 months because yeah, really, the number of papers nowadays is overwhelming. I'm stressed, to be honest. I'm stressed because every day there are a few papers more, and you can't read all of them. You see the title, and then you have to put it away because there's something else knocking on your door.
yeah,
So the information that is available is really overwhelming, but I don't see any reaction or action. And you started by saying that I'm retired. Yes, but I'm also tired actually, because really, it's so many and so much to keep track of. And I see the signs with the rapidly decreasing, for instance, number of pollinators. 2, 3 years ago, we went to France and came down to their west coast. We visited a small family hotel, and the hostess, the first morning, she came in and said, "Oh, you have to enjoy the honey because this is the last season that we can get this honey. The beekeeper have announced that the volume is so small nowadays, so he can only keep it for himself and his family." She thought we were tourists, but we froze because we were there to ask people, men and women in France, about the situation of pollinators. And she gave the answer. And we really sat there and felt miserable, actually, you know.
yeah. Well, I said I hope that you're right that legislatures, people in power, will start paying attention to this because
Well, yeah, and I hope that I'm wrong, because that would be so much easier. You mentioned firefighters. I'm a kind of a mental fire brigade soldier. And as the real firefighters, if there isn't any fire, they don't cry or get angry, they get happy. I would also get happy if all the tens of thousands of publications all would be wrong. But the probability for that, well, it's very, very
pretty
small, you know.
low.
So, yeah,
Great. Well, Professor, I said I'd love to have you back on the show, and I think we could talk even more about this topic. But again,
yeah.
I'm just grateful you spent the time with us today
Thank you.
and appreciate sharing all that great knowledge.
Thank you.